G'day guys, my name's Tim. I thought I'd make this little video because when I started my little journey on this car with my dad, I wanted to say to everyone and be like, yeah, I can polish my own car, etc, etc, etc. I'd never used a polisher before in my life. Got these for Christmas. Apex Customs DA, and I've been very lucky to use some really nice compounds. But unfortunately, no one had really shown me the basics, and a lot of YouTube channels were telling me things that I thought were good to know, but most of which I now realize are actually mostly irrelevant for a beginner. I'm sorry that I'm not really on the camera because we're going to be focusing on the car here, but I'm going to go over a few steps, few things that if you're an absolute complete beginner, you've never polished anything before in your life, are going to be really good things to know, just super basic. We're not going to go into the details of what happens or anything like that because it's mostly useless if you don't know what is actually happening. So the first thing that I'm going to mention is how the polisher works. Now, one critical mistake I made when I was learning is I thought that pressure equals cutting. Doesn't. What actually makes the difference is the rotation of the pad. Like that. And it took me a while to realize that it's not the vibration or the oscillation of these polishers that does the work, it's actually the rotation. The oscillation helps keep it cool. We're not going to go into heat of the panel or pad or anything like that, but the main thing to remember is that the biggest thing you need to know is that this pad needs to spin. And that's critical. It's very important. If it's not spinning, it's not cutting. And I wasted, oh God, I don't know how much time. Pads, compound, so much compound. At $50 for a bottle of that stuff, you know, there's a lot of money too. So the biggest thing, and I'll give you an example. Let me just put a mark on this. Okay. So I put a blue piece of tape on there. I'm going to give you guys a good example of basically what I was doing and what you want to avoid doing. Let's put my headlamp on the right way so I can actually see. And hopefully you'll actually see as well. Alright, let's get to it. So you could see there, when I was at low speed, when I turned the speed down, we weren't cutting very much. And the reason we weren't cutting very much is because the actual pad had stopped spinning. I hope you can actually see that in the video. You could see that I could see that the pad wasn't spinning, but you could also see that my indicator marker wasn't spinning at all either. You can see there, we got a pretty nice, really glossy finish right there. So that's the first thing, is making sure that your pad is actually spinning and actually doing its job. Now that was just a really quick once over, and that's using a very fine polish as well. There are different grades, of course, but whatever cutting polish you have, this is a fresh paint job. And this panel is actually not, this isn't the finished example because there's lots of nibs and dirt, and I think there's a run here that I need to get out. That's fine because this car was painted here at home. So the next thing that I learned that stuffed me up a heaps, and I didn't understand why it was stuffing me up until quite recently, is too much compound. So you can see here, I did a couple of small dots. I'll give an example. I'll put some fresh on, a topper, but I'll do it as if I'm doing a fresh panel, or a fresh amount. I'll show you how much you put on. So we just, like that. No one really goes over why they do this. The dots, not important. It's just you could do little stripes, whatever, doesn't matter, as long as it gets onto the panel. But the reason you don't sit there and you dab on it, or every single time, you don't need to do this. No, I didn't need to add more here. There's still enough on the pad to continue cutting. And this is important because if you have too much compound on your pad, the compound's going to harden, and it'll grip. It'll start gripping your paint. And the warmer it gets, it's going to act like a soft rubber tire. And that's going to be detrimental. That's going to be really detrimental to your cutting efforts, because you're not going to be cutting, you're just going to be heating the panel. Especially on fresh paint, you're doing nothing. And 3 dabs like this, I could just, look at that, whole guard with like 3 small dabs. And I, myself, am definitely guilty of putting way too much compound and ending up with like a mass of compound on my pad. And that is, it's really detrimental. Too much compound can stuff you up super, super quickly. But this panel's pretty glossy already, but let's just see how far that can go. And then another little tip, when you're applying fresh compound like I've done here, I like to put the speed all the way down on your relative machine. It might be similar to this, whatever the low speed setting is, as long as you have optional speed, and most DAs do. I like to put it on low and just spread it around. Just like that. And we've got enough compound on there now to go ahead and do that whole panel. That's all on there. Number 3 for this, and it's another thing that stuffed me up, is I never let the polisher do the work. I always thought that, just straight over, and I'm like, why isn't it cutting? And it's like cutting a piece of metal with a grinder. If you just go, you're not cutting through anything, you're marking it at best. With a polisher, you might as well not be doing anything. A polisher needs to be able to work, and this also relates to how much you're rotating. And unfortunately, I don't have a formula here that means, hey, if you've got Jeep paint, or you've got factory Subaru paint, or you've got Honda paint, or Volkswagen paint, or Porsche paint, whatever. I don't have a formula that tells you how long you have to work it. It all comes down to experience, and I'm lucky I'm learning on this paint, which is new, and the clear is super, super, super thick and very hard to cut. It's a De Beers HS clear, which is a high solids clear, and it sets like diamond. So it's a good clear to practice on, but it's also a very frustrating clear to practice on because you don't see the results immediately, which really drives home this third point of letting your polisher do the work. Because if you're not cutting anything. And if you're not cutting anything, you're basically rubbing it over with a microfiber with some polish on it, except you're getting the panel slightly warm. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. So for this one, we're going to turn the speed up a bit. And I guess that also sort of segues into my fourth point here for beginners, is that a lot of people will say, oh, you need to use a number 3 speed with this pad. And I find that is really detrimental advice because 9 times out of 10, it's actually wrong for your application. I went by that advice a lot. I believed in it. And now I realize with a little bit more experience that the whole fundamental thing I was doing had nothing to do with speed. It was that my whole process was wrong. So if you're following this process now, you know to make sure your pad's spinning and actually cutting. Don't use too much compound. Spend some time on the panel, and your machine speed isn't as important as people will say. And I usually find that if I'm working here in this sort of tight area where we've got a downslope to an upslope on the panel, here you might want to go faster. And the reason you want to go faster with a DA is because it will help the pad actually rotate instead of just oscillate. So, yeah, let's get going now. I've got my speed on my Apex DA at number 4, which is relatively high. And the higher the speed, the faster the rotation, the faster the cutting action. Now, if you're working on really soft paints, obviously you might want to go a bit slower. But this all comes down to experience. This is why they say so much to work with practice panels, so you get a good feel of what the paint does and how it reacts. Unfortunately, you're very unlikely to encounter 2 paint jobs that are exactly the same. So it really comes down to how you feel and how you see it. And all of this comes down to practice, and you're going to have to spend a lot of time in your DA before it starts to make any sense at all. Trust me, been there, done that. All right, so let's get started up here. Like I said, I'm probably going to have to recut this panel once I get rid of all the dust and things in the paint there, but that is looking really nice. On camera it's going to be a little hard to see, but I will try and give you guys an example. Let me pick you up. So yeah, you can see it's looking really nice, really glassy. There is some small tiny imperfections about there. But like I said, this whole panel is going to need to be sanded back and redone anyway. For our final little bit, I'll just show you about low speed versus high speed. In the same example I used to make sure that the pad is spinning, I'm going to go here again. I'm going to show you the difference between applying heavy pressure versus light pressure, low speed versus high speed. We're going to start off low speed, high pressure, so you can see that the pad will stall. pressure. And look how little the pressure we need to get that spinning again. Now we up. Up the tempo. Just like that. So you can see there in both those examples, what was essentially happening was that at the lowest speed, the pad was stalling. When it was stalling, we weren't polishing at all. We weren't getting anything out of there. But now you can see we've got a really nice looking gloss, very few sanding marks. The whole lot looks good, like you can see here, of course. Now, in areas like this, I would either recommend a rotary where it's not going to stall, because you can actually see here, when it stalls in these little areas, it leaves the sanding marks. And this is a perfect example of what happens when the pad stops spinning there, is it leaves those sanding marks. But with time and patience, you get that all out. So, that, my friends, is the basic guide to polishing. As you guys can see, I have a lot more work ahead of me on this particular panel, but I just wanted to share my experience with getting a really nice finished paint job and being able to do it with a DA. And hopefully this helps some of you guys manage the exact same thing and get out there and unlock that gloss. Thank you for watching. Enjoy. See ya.